recording. And I have a new picture for the YouTube channel, but looks like we're still working with this one. So last week, what's interesting is that this has been one of the more watched videos, but it's one of the shortest amounts of time. And so last week, as I just mentioned, we went through quite a bit of tedious stuff to kind of figure out what we were doing, what was necessary to look at, what wasn't necessary to look at. And I got to the point where I decided that I think that if we're going to be looking at anything, we should be looking at we should be cutting it down. We should be breaking it down. What we found from last week was that as a result of a defective understanding of both gender and sexuality, that most of these techniques that were around sexuality were so biased that they were not really particularly useful. And especially, we looked especially at the ones that represented what was considered deviant behavior, like homosexual behavior, lesbianism, etc., which we'll look at a little bit again this time. But I've come to, after that last week and kind of dealing with all that, I came to the decision that it really makes the most sense to kind of, the reason we investigate is to see what works and see what doesn't. And so last week, we got a really good portion of what might not really be working. And so I thought what we should do is focus this week on the things that we know kind of work, or the things that, or that kind of fit within forms or processes that we're used to dealing with. So for those of you who are new, Rhonda and I don't want to say your name wrong, so I'm not going to say it. But the two ladies who are new, I've already said Tamarius is wrong, like for an entire session, and I don't want to do it again. What I want to say is that the way that astrology is kind of approached right now is that usually you find somebody asks a question like, oh, tell me about my love life, or tell me about my career. Let's use career for a moment, because we're going to be doing the whole session on love life. And so what will the person do? The person will look at the sign on the cusp of the 10th house, which is known for career. And they'll say, oh, well, you've got a Gemini midheaven. You should do this kind of thing. And so, and same thing with almost everything. Well, oh, will I be able to have children? Oh, well, you've got Jupiter in the 5th. Yeah, that should be no problem, right? So there tends to be a very kind of cursory understanding or a cursory judgment that takes precedence. And as a result, a lot of modern astrologers aren't really that accurate. And accuracy is not really the goal. I mean, a certain amount of accuracy is the goal, but like being super accurate, like 100% jaw-dropping accurate is not really the goal, right? But it is in this kind of astrology. And so what we find is that we look at many different things to come to a judgment. So we wouldn't just look at the sign on the midheaven. Matter of fact, there's a whole separate technique for figuring out the profession that we've talked about quite often. So one of the things that we'll always find with this material from this time period is that there will be a list of things that we should look at in order to be able to come to a judgment about one subject. And so as you see here, it says it is necessary for you to examine concerning sexual unions, and sexual unions includes marriage, because of course in the 13th century, the only kind of laudable sexual union was between a man and a woman who were married. After you have delayed examining the matter of children, right? Because you have to be able to have sex in order to have children. If therefore you wish to look upon the sexual uniting of the native, examine the 7th and its Lord. Okay, so that's right within kind of what we would do now. Look at this cusp. Look, and nowadays what you see is people saying, hey, what sign should I be dating? And they base it on the cusp of the 7th house. And we've talked about that and how I think that's a garbage technique as well. However, that's not what we're really dealing with. But the first thing we want to look at is the 7th cusp and the Lord of the 7th. So already it starts to get a little bit different, but modern astrologers do that too. Then in a man's chart, we would look at the moon and Venus. Now, this week, we're looking at a woman's chart. So the significators for a woman's chart for unions or marriages are the sun and Mars. So this week, we're going to look at the seventh, its Lord, planets in the seventh, the sun and Mars, and the part of sexual union, which is the part of marriage and its Lord. And last week, we realized that there are more than one, right? There are 3 or 4 of them that we can use. There are 3 that we can use. And one maybe primarily looks more into sex than into marriage. But so those are the places that I thought that we would look at. So generally, when you're on Reddit and somebody is saying, "Hey, my marriage, I have information about my love life, my career, and my love life." When you see the love life thing, then you know what we're looking at is 7th house, the Lord of the 7th, planets in the 7th. If it's a man, moon and Venus. If it's a woman, sun and Mars. And then these parts, and we're going to talk about the parts in a second. That's the list of all the things. 7th, Lord of the 7th, planet in the 7th, moon and Venus or sun and Mars, part of marriage, and the Lord of the part of marriage. And I did a few of these to kind of just get ourselves through. Oh, it's not there. Okay, so actually, let me go to here. What I wanted to look at here was this listing that Scherner has, which is almost exactly the same. So for the 7th house, its Lord, co-significator of the 7th, which is always the moon for men. Notice that this is the sexual union of men, because the moon is the significator for women. So for Rhonda and, is it Wanuji? I will stop the share just 1 second so I can see the name again. Wanjiru, thank you, sorry. So for Rhonda and for Wanjiru, I talked about this just a little bit before. Houses represent certain areas of life. Planets, based on the houses that they rule, and we're going to look at a chart and we'll talk about all of this stuff based on the chart, can represent areas of life. But then different planets have what we call natural significations. So for instance, Jupiter is the natural significator for wealth and for fertility. Venus is the natural significator for marriage and love. The moon is the natural significator for women. However, Venus is also a female planet, so the moon and Venus can both represent females. Sun, Mars, and Jupiter and Saturn are all male planets. Mercury is a hermaphrodite, becomes male with the male planets, becomes female with the female planets. Every planet has its own inherent significations. And so that's a really major thing that I focus on. And that's one of the major differences between modern astrology and traditional astrology, is that there's a real focus, there's less of a focus on how the planet translates into a behavior and more of a focus on what specific things are under the planet's rulership. So for instance, the moon rules women, she rules mothers, she rules silver, she rules oceans and waterways, right? So there's all of these different things that she rules salty flavors, right? These are all her significations. And every planet has its own specific significations on top of whatever else that we would be looking at. And in my opinion, it's knowing these significations that are the key to understanding and being able to use astrology. Note when we come down here and we look at this thing that says the almutin of the significators of the 7th house and unions. Almutin is a Latinized Arabic term which means winner. And so it would be the 7th house, its Lord, Venus, the part of unions, its Lord. And then we've been talking about triplicities, the first triplicity Lord of the 7th house. So we can see the continuity of it is 7th Lord, 7th house, its Lord, either Sun and Mars for women, right? whatever else, what the part of marriage, Venus, right? Triplicity lords of Venus, which is a technique we're going to talk about next week. And then, he gives us this whole huge thing. So you can use that list if you want. You can write that list down or take a screenshot of it. Because when we come to the charts, which we're about to do in a second, we're going to use this list. So in this particular one, I've got the charts of quite a few different people. I've got, here comes Su Ching. Great. Hey, Su Ching, welcome. So I've got the charts where you come at a perfect time, because we just kind of got started and we've just kind of set forth our parameters of what it is that we're going to look at when we look at these charts. So I've got the charts of some saints. I've got the charts of some whores. I've got the charts of Ellen DeGeneres, of a famous lesbian. I've got the a chart of Heidi Fleiss, who's a famous madam. I've got the chart of, let's see, so the chart of Saint Bernadette and Saint Therese of Lisieux. Those are the two celibate charts that I thought we would look at. And then I've got the charts of two porn actresses. And then I've got the chart of a woman named Marguerite Steinheil, who was she was the courtesan. She wasn't really a courtesan. She was married, but she had affairs with many, very, very. Matter of fact, she had an affair with the president of France, and so she was known for having affairs with men in very, very high positions. And she was accused of the murder of her husband and mother. So I thought that would be an interesting chart to look at. Tracy Lords, who started her porn career when she was still in her teens. And then we have one of somebody who is from my study, my astrological study, who was sexually trafficked as a young child. And I thought we would look to see if there's a kind of a trauma element that we can see in the chart as well. Let's start with Saint Bernadette. Now, Saint Bernadette is if anybody is familiar with a place in France called Lourdes. Lourdes is a famous pilgrimage site, and it became famous because of Bernadette. Saint Bernadette was she was a young girl that was born in the Pyrenees, and she was a shepherd. She was a young, not very well educated shepherd girl. And one day, now Lourdes was what was it? It was a Roman outpost. I've been to Lourdes, and so we had a tour guide that gave us this information. So it was a Roman outpost, and it had a temple to a water goddess in it, or there was a very famous temple to a water deity, to a goddess who was a water deity. And so Bernadette was off in the hills, and she started seeing this apparition of this woman. She was kind of dressed in blue and white, and she showed up quite a few times. And the last time that she showed up, she said, "I am the Immaculate Conception." This is in 1854. Or 1858. 1858. It's right, around 1858. In 1854, Pope Pius IX created the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception of Mary, that not only was Jesus immaculately conceived, but Mary would also have to be immaculately conceived. And that particular essence, or that particular theoretical or theological reality, became a part of the Catholic Church in 1854. Around 1854, around this same time. So when the Catholic Church started coming to Lourdes to find out what was going on with this woman this young girl seeing these apparitions, when they heard her say that the apparition said, I am the Immaculate Conception, they finally realized that that this was real. She basically saw this woman in a grotto that had all this water that was kind of dripping in it. And now there's a huge tank. Like, everything in Lourdes is about water. Everything. There are humongous bottles that are shaped like the Virgin Mary. You go and you dip into water. There's everything is about water in Lourdes. So it's interesting that the continuity from paganism to Christianity, the water symbolism is still there. Now, aside from that, that's not what we're here to talk about with Saint Bernadette. Bernadette died in her 30s, a nun. right? So Bernadette was a young virginal girl with no education. After all of this came down, she went into the convent and she died a virgin in the convent. Thus, this person never experienced sex. So we would be looking to see what things would show that, right? What things would show either a lack of interest in sexuality, or would show or would show celibacy, right? Shows downright celibacy. So the first thing that I want to kind of say is that I tend to notice in myself, I have Venus in an air sign. And I tend to find that a proliferation, there it is, a proliferation or proliferation, there it is, a proliferation of air signs can detach the person from their physicality. A proliferation of air signs in a chart can detach the person from their physicality. It can put them too much in their head. It can put them it can make them too mental and not really kinetic enough. This is something that I've dealt with all my life. My chart ruler is in Gemini. My Venus and my Mars are both in Aquarius. So I deal, and so mostly fire and air for me in my chart. So I really have an issue with groundedness, or that's something I've dealt with most of my life. That's an issue for the air signs as well, of groundedness, which means if we're not fully grounded, if we don't come down into our bodies, we don't fully come down into our genitals, right? The genitals we're talking about sex. We're not talking about marriage and love right now. But note that when he was talking sexual unions, he didn't make a difference. Sexual unions, marriage, it's pretty much the same thing, who you're joining with. So let's look to see what's going on here. Now, once again, then there's some other things that we should think about. First of all, for the two new people, signs represent things, planets represent things, houses represent things, right? Then distances between planets, distances between two planets that represent similar things can also represent things. For instance, I've been using this one every week. The sun is the significator for father by day. Saturn is the significator for father by night. The distance between the sun and Saturn creates this thing called a lot or a part. And once we find that distance, we then project it from the ascendant, which is the house of life, the person themselves, their body, their physical being, their physical reality. We project it from there, and then that lot or part also then represents the father. So signs can represent things, planets can represent things, houses can represent things, lots or parts can represent things. And so when we saw that list, and the very last thing was the part of sexual unions, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about the distance between two significators projected from the ascendant. And wherever that falls, that place and the planet that rules that place are giving us more information about the thing. I'm going to make an example about everything. So first house, second house, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, cusp of the seventh. The seventh is always opposite the first house. The 10th is always opposite the fourth. Those are the angles of the chart. Excuse me. The seventh cusp, that's where we look for marriage and partnership, but also divorce and enmity, right? And right, so that's hunting and a thief. That's where we look for all those things. So the Sagittarius is on the cusp of the seventh, so we would look at Sagittarius, and then we would also look at Jupiter. Note that the North Node is there. Now, if we were to use this modern understanding of the North Node, then we would say, oh, well, it means that the person needs to be going towards interpersonal relationships, right? But that doesn't really make any sense with this chart of a celibate nun. Of course, all nuns are what? They're brides of Christ. And the Jupiter is in the 9th house of religion. So Jupiter, the ruler of the Sagittarius, and ruler of Sagittarius, and ruler of the North Node. Now, those of you who know me and have worked with me, you know that I don't think that it's enough to just look at where the North Node is by sign and house. We must also look at the planet who rules it. And here we see that the planet that rules it, well, it's not in the ninth house, is it? It's in the 10th, but it's in the ninth sign. So it's got a ninth house, 10th house connection. And Jupiter is the ruler of the 10th, which gives us even more of a ninth house, 10th house connection, if we're looking at it by whole sign. Right? So that, instead of looking at the 7th house necessarily as being the area that they should look at, maybe what we should be looking at instead is the fact that the node is angular, and thus it's going to be something everybody can see. It's going to be something everybody will be, something that's visible. And Rahu represents ghosts and apparitions. And Rahu represents things that are unconventional or out of the usual, right? It was a ghost or apparition that she saw. So that doesn't say very much about marriage and love, but Jupiter is in the sign of Saturn, Aquarius, and he's not in the sign of Saturn that is licentious. So for our new people, in traditional astrology, the signs don't really have that much import. I won't say they don't have any import, but they don't have that much import, and they don't really, like nowadays, all of the zodiac signs, it feels like they all have a life of their own. But back in this period, the planets are what make everything happen. For instance, when you look, if somebody looks at a transit, you don't look at a transit of a zodiac sign, you look at a transit of a planet, because that's what makes something happen. Zodiac signs don't make anything happen. But what they can do is they can modify a planet as per their nature, and then they also have certain classifications that also modify the planet. For instance, as I mentioned, there are signs that are called licentious, or what do they call it? Of foul sex, of foul coitus, of stinking coitus, and those signs are Aries, Taurus, Leo, Libra, and Capricorn. Saturn, this planet here, rules Capricorn, which is this sigil, and Aquarius. Capricorn is an earth sign. So this Saturnian nature of Capricorn is licentious and venal, and can be venal and licentious. But this Jupiter, the ruler of the 7th, is in the air aspect of Saturn, which is more interested in the mental thing, right? Air is mentation, air is thinking, air is communication, air is conversation, air is all of those things, air is debate. So it's Saturn's airy expression that the ruler of the 7th is expressing. Oh, here comes Shanice. Yay, Shanice, hi. We just started looking at charts. I have decided we're not going to wade through any more bullshit about with looking at these medieval authors talk garbage about gender and sexuality. We're going to just get right to what we think works. And so that's what we're doing. So we're looking at the chart of Saint Bernadette, who is let's see what she would say. Hey. Yeah, so all right, so as I'm mentioning, we already talked about how the air signs can have a separating effect on the physicality, right? They can make us too mental. They can put us in our heads. They can stuff us in our heads. And then also the fact that, remember, Saturn is cold and dry, and even though Capricorn, his earth nature, is licentious, Aquarius, his air nature, I think really shows his coldness. Both of them show his coldness, but the air nature of Saturn. So what we have here now is Jupiter is in the sign of a planet who is cold and dry. He himself is warm and wet. The sign of Aquarius is somewhat warm and wet, but Saturn himself is in his own sign, very, very dry. And remember, Saturn represents austerity. Right? Saturn represents severity and austerity. Right? After she had these apparitions, she went into the convent. She didn't become a mother. She didn't become a wife and mother and have a long, lovely life. She became a nun and died in the convent. So note that the Venus, right? So the first thing we would look at is ruler of the seventh and the ruler of the seventh. Then we would look at the sun and Mars. So the sun and Mars in this chart are experiencing, and they are experiencing a sextile. And so obviously, if, I mean, this looks like maybe if she had wanted to get married, she might have been able to, right? I mean, doesn't seem to be a problem between maybe finding a man for her with this. And look at even the fact that the sun is pushing nature onto Mars from his exaltation, right? So there's a sextile with reception. So that would be a sign to me that this would be possible, that marriage might, or that attracting a man might be possible, or that a man might find her, men might find her attractive. Right. So the partner, finding the partner, if we're using Sun and Mars for the partner for a person, there doesn't look like that's the problem. What it's looking like is this chill over the Mercury, the Venus, and the Jupiter. And note that the moon is opposing all of it. The moon's opposing Venus. Right? The moon is opposing Venus. That's the next application the moon's about to do. And this Venus is in Aquarius. Right. So I think that that's a really good kind of, I think this is I mean, we can't, the jury's out, mind you, but this is an interesting thing. We've looked at the sun and Mars. Oh, now we look at Venus. And he would say, look at the first triplicity ruler of the seventh house. So let's stop for a second and talk about triplicity. So triplicity is just another word for element, but in its title, there is an implication of three. There are three signs in every element, right? There are three qualities of sign. There is the cardinal or movable, like Aries, Leo, Cancer, Capricorn. There is the fixed, like Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. There is the mutable or double-bodied, like Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. Right. So we've got that kind. So those are other classifications for signs. Those are the classifications that most of us are aware of. Right. It's the classifications like fertile, sterile, licentious. Those are the ones that most people don't really know very much. But in this particular case, the moon is in a sterile sign. And as I mentioned last week, I think when we're looking at seventh house matters, sterile and fertile matters just as much as when we look at fifth house matters. The fifth house is the house of children. So the fertile signs are the water signs, Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces. The sterile signs are Gemini, Leo, Virgo. Note that the ruler of the ascendant, that the ascendant is sterile. The ruler of the moon is sterile. And then we've got Venus and Mercury relatively close together, and Jupiter, the ruler of the seventh, all in signs ruled by Saturn, who's in the eighth house, right? And the eighth house is the occult and what we don't know and what we don't see. Or Saturn's in the ninth, but it would be the natural eighth. In this chart, the natural eighth and ninth would be ruled by Saturn. In this particular case, it's the natural eighth, ninth, and 10th. So he does rule the eighth as well. And look at how he's the part of fortune, the eighth house, right? So the eighth house is the occult, is the unseen. Remember, we already know that Rahu is in the seventh. We were talking about how Rahu, and also the ruler of Rahu, Rahu representing ghosts and apparitions, it's in the seventh house, right? So we've already talked about the other fact that something with the unseen is going to be the important thing. And this woman did also suffer as a result. There were many people that came and didn't believe her, and there was some scandal until it until it was accepted as true. There was scandal. So all of that kind of stuff. So note that this Saturn rules the eighth and the ninth and the 10th. He's not really interested in anything else, and all of these planets are working for him. And the Mars is working for the Jupiter, and the Sun is working for the Saturn. All right, those are the two planets that would represent the partner for this female, right? So I think that this gives us a good showing of a person that might not be so interested in coming together with someone else. This is Saint Therese of Lisieux, and Saint Therese of Lisieux also died really young. I think she died at 27. I think it was 37 for Bernadette and 27 for Lisieux, for Therese of Lisieux. And Therese of Lisieux wrote a little book, and the book is so highly regarded in modern Roman Catholicism that she was named one of the doctors of the church. And as you can see, she died, I think, in 1925. No, she died before that, 1900 or something like that. Let me see. Do I have it up here? No, I don't have it up. But anyway, but she died, like I said, 27. She didn't live very long. That would make sense, wouldn't it? 93 would be 20, 27 would be 1900. She died in 1900. So this is another celibate. This is somebody, though, who had a very deep correspondence with a man that was very tender and loving, but there was no, there was no I don't even know if she came into his physical proximity ever. So let's see here. And someone who died a virgin, another person who died a virgin, and she started having visions when she was like 13, and she went into the convent when she was 15. Now, we haven't looked at either of these charts from the standpoint of religion necessarily, right? But no, even in that last chart, noting that Saturn is the ruler of the ninth and the ruler of the seventh is there, the ruler of the seventh, we would either say, oh, you might meet your lover in church. We could say, oh, you might meet your lover in a foreign place, or maybe religion is more important than love. Maybe love is subsumed by religion. So maybe these are all ways that we can be looking at the ruler of the seventh and the ninth. So the ruler of the seventh here is Mars, who's in the sign of his detriment in the first house. So that's interesting. So the ruler of the seventh is in the first. Usually that would mean that there would be a partner, that the partner would have quite an important like remember when we saw Clarence Thomas's chart, and the ruler of the seventh is in the first there, and the partner is very much kind of dominant in this particular case. Mars is not a symbol of any kind of religion here, so it's interesting to see that that's kind of showing Mars is detrimented, right? So that's already a sign against possibly being married, but Mars is in the sign of Venus, who is the lady of marriage. Right? So that's something. Venus is in Aquarius. Another Aquarian Venus. Now, I want to talk a little bit about myself for just a second, because I have an Aquarian Venus. It's a Mars-Venus Aquarius conjunction, and separating. And I have gone in and out of periods of celibacy. I've gone into periods of extreme sexual, of extreme sexual activity, not too many. I've done sex work, but not necessarily as an escort, but through the healing, through massage and healing. But I have never been super high sex drive. But I am known for being, well, I mean, that's too much information, but I'm not known for being super high sex drive. And have gone long periods. I went through 4.5 years and had sex 3 times. Right. So for a gay man, that isn't necessarily something you think about. So I do tend to think that Venus in Aquarius has a chilling effect. It's a Saturn ruled sign. We know that Saturn is cold and dry, and Saturn can chill the ardor of Venus. And knowing the difference between Venus in Capricorn, which is licentious, and Venus in Aquarius, which might be more interested in connecting via the mind. And I had a friend who used to say to me, this is back when I was still celibate, he said, you have sex, you just do it through conversation. So we can see that a similar thing might have been happening here with this kind of celibate romance that this woman had, and it's a Libra rising chart, right? So the celibate romance that this woman had with a friend, and as a result, and note also that the part of fortune is in the 11th of friends, or a colleague even, which would be the 3rd house, right? So this woman, this woman did have the ability to show tenderness to others, and specifically to a man. But it doesn't look like, in this particular case, the Venus cares much about this. Now, what about what's going on with the moon? Look at how the moon's in Pisces. That's Venus's exaltation. So once again, this tenderness, this sweetness, this tenderness is available. But look at how the Jupiter is in Virgo, Venus's fall and retrograde. But Mercury is in Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter. So it looks like Jupiter is really calling the shots in this chart, right? The two planets that represent the soul, moon, and Mercury are both in signs that are ruled by Jupiter. Virgo is the fall of Venus. Jupiter is in the 12th, which means we don't want to be seen. We don't want to be public. Right? Mercury is in Jupiter's sign. Mercury rules religion. Mercury is trining the part of fortune. Mercury is applying to the Venus. So note that the ruler of the ninth is applying to the Venus here, applying to the ruler of the ascendant. So I think religion overtook. Remember, this person went into the convent at 15. Religion is all, religious experience is all this person cares about. Ecstasy, the ecstasy of religious experience is all, that's the sex. I had an interesting conversation when I lived in Thailand with a good friend of mine, brilliant guy who was teaching science at one of the schools there, and brilliant math science person, so smart, such a fucking smart guy. And he was talking about being an atheist. And I said, I mean, I understand that, you say you're an atheist, but in my opinion, everybody worships something. Everybody, it could be money, it could be sex, it could be cars, it could be, fame, but everybody kneels before something. Everybody worships something. And I said to him, he goes, I don't know. I go, well, I said, what about you and math? He goes, well, I worship math and science. I said, okay. I said, well, if Pythagoras walked in here right now, well, he goes, oh my God, I would be on my knees. I'm like, there we go. Pythagoras is one of the patron saints of your religion. So everybody worships something. So maybe we can even say that everybody finds a way to have sex, even if it has nothing to do with the body and genitalia. This woman found a way to have sex, or not, right? I always say there are only four choices: men, women, all of the above, none of the above, right? Those are the choices. So it looks like in that last chart, it was truly a none of the above type chart. In this chart, it looks like there's a real need for interaction. The Venus, chart ruler, very different, that there might be a need for interaction. Mind you, Saint Bernadette was a messenger and Gemini was rising. Right? Saint Bernadette was the messenger for the Virgin Mary, and Gemini is rising in this chart. Mercury is the messenger. Mercury, who rules Gemini, is the messenger. And note that Mercury is with Venus, the lady, that she kept calling her the lady. And note that Mercury is in the 9th house of religion. Now, here's the other thing. The 3rd house is goddess. The 3rd house is the moon in this particular chart rules the 3rd house, and we could it's within 5 degrees of the 4th cusp. So I would generally put it in the 4th, but by whole sign, the moon is in the 3rd. The moon is in her joy in the house of goddess. Goddess is in the house of goddess, and it's opposing Venus, who is another goddess, and Mercury, the chart ruler, is applying to Venus, right? So the moon is translating Mercury to Venus in this chart. So in this chart, it's not about sex, it's about some kind of occult experience with a goddess. In the Thérèse of Lisieux chart, it's about expressing love, about how my religious feeling, how I express love through my religious feeling. But the precedent, the thing that's the most important, is the real experience of religious ecstasy that I then impart to other relationships. Questions and comments so far? Anything, ladies, mind you, anything. Anything that you feel like you're confused about. Rhonda, I know you tend to say, hey, I'm just writing notes, I blah, blah, blah. But seriously, if anything is confusing you, anything you want me to go back over, please ask me. Because I'm going to move from saints to whores. It really is beautiful how it all comes together. I'm going to have to, sorry, we tried to pause you several times already. All right. Well, thank
sorry,
you.
could I ask a quick question?
Of course you can.
Yeah, so when it comes to house divisions, like for instance, I know my Venus moves from 6 to 7 depending on the sign. Like how do you handle that?
I combine them.
Okay.
I combine the house, right? It's for a reason. So I just combine them. If she moves from one to the other, then there's a reason that she moved, is how I feel generally.
Okay, so significations of both
Houses
would come into play?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my feeling. And of course, you should be able to see that in your own life, right? So you should that means that there should be some kind of pattern of dissatisfaction in love.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Right. Because 6 is bad fortune, right? So that's the point, is that when these things go back and forth, in my opinion, they go back and forth for a reason, and they should both be taken into account. We know most people deal with difficulties in relationship. But we do know people, but you know, I had a client recently who's 28 and never had a relationship of any kind. When I was 14, I had a very good female friend who had sex with 10 different boys by that particular time. Do you know what I'm saying? Everybody's thing is different. Everybody's thing is so different. Now, look at how this is the chart of a porn actress, and there's Moon Saturn in the 7th. Now both of these porn actresses of charts that I'm using ended kind of sadly, or actually, no, I think no, only one of them. The 40707 died of AIDS. This one basically just kind of rolled. She started in porn and rolled over into prostitution. What I thought was interesting about these charts was how the ruler of the 12th started kind of showing up in career things. So the 12th is what we don't see and what's behind closed doors. And in Jyotish, the 12th has to do with bed pleasures and sleep. And so, for instance, Venus in the 12th, almost always when we see Venus in the 12th, we know that there are affairs that don't see the light of day. You know, so often we can see that the person may have great memories of great sex, but might not have a marriage to be able to look back on because it never went public. The relationship was never able to go public. So what I thought was interesting, and what I'd love to continue looking at in charts of other prostitutes, is how the 12th house is involved. Note here that the ruler of the 12th is on the part of fortune in Taurus. So we often look at the 12th house as this concept of self-undoing. But we also know that, and of course, in this particular case, it could end up this way. We're trying to look at all of these things without any kind of moral judgment, right? So I'm not interested in judging anybody. I think prostitution should be legalized. I think it's a perfectly acceptable profession. And if someone chooses, if someone is not being coerced into it, or if as it looks like might be the case with both this chart and the other chart, if they didn't turn to it because of negative things in the home. And in my opinion, look at how the ruler, in my opinion, this chart might have some of that. Look at how the moon is actually going first to the opposition of Mars. The Mars and Leo, I call that rager. So this person might be a rager, and also they might come from a ragey household because Mars is the ruler of the natural fourth of of family. Note also that the sun is in a hot and dry sign. So the hot and dry planets are Mars and Sun, and the hot and dry signs are the fire signs. Note how both of them are hot and dry. Now, one of the things that I think I was talking about recently was that when I thought often about what makes a person into a porn actor or actress, and I was especially looking at male charts. One of the things that I thought would be necessary is that there has to be a level of exhibitionism in a chart in order to become a porn actress or actor, right? Because it's not like being a prostitute, right, which happens behind closed doors, but it also needs to be something where you are on display, right? Where you are interested in being on display, or you don't have a problem with being on display. So before I was kind of looking at these things more closely, I had come up with my own idea of what I thought created a porn star. And I thought that there needed to be, the signs Leo needed to be involved, because the sun or Leo represents display and recognition and being out in the public. And so notice how Leo is rising and the sun is in the midheaven. The sun's in the 10th. So this kind of, hey, look at me, public on display thing. And then this Mars and Leo, I call the rager. And that means, you can rage in a lot of ways. It can be a raging party. You can be a raging alcoholic. You can be a rageaholic. You can be a raging sex fiend. And note that Mars is ruler of the 5th in this chart. And that the sign of the genitals, Scorpio ruling the genitals, is on the cusp of the 5th. Venus is the ruler of the part of fortune, and she herself is exalted in Pisces in the 9th. In the 11th from the part of fortune, which is called the acquisition. Note that the moon and the Saturn, one of the things that I have noticed, there's a real difference between men who go into porn astrologically and women who go into porn astrologically. And it was interesting because when I was originally starting this on my own and kind of coming up with my own idea of what I thought turned a person into a porn star, I noticed that it didn't work in the female charts. And same here with this. Most of the stuff about what makes a man a horn dog, what makes a man really interested in sex, almost all of this stuff was made with men in mind. Everything, this is the 13th century. It's a completely patriarchal culture. So all of the delineations that we look at are usually with men in mind, but often can be neutralized into a unisex, can be used in a unisex manner. When we come to marriage, that's one of those things that can't be done that way, right? And where they bifurcate, where they actually also bifurcate when it comes to marriage and sex of that nature. But when it comes to things like porn, what you tend to see in the men's charts is lots of moon in Taurus, or moon in Libra, or Venus in Libra, or moon in Leo, or you see all the time Leo and Taurus, right? Those are two licentious signs, right? In the women's signs, what I'm noticing, or the women's charts, what you're seeing is distance. Moon in Aquarius, moon in Virgo, moon in Gemini. You're seeing a distance. You're seeing something that creates a distance. Creates a what's the word I'm looking for? It's not renunciation. It's a different word. But let's just, because even this thing with the Saturn moon, that's not intimate. It can be serious. I was just looking at some rapper charts known for being with lots of women, and they had exalted moons, right? We can pretty much guess that the male moon in Taurus, it makes the person quite amorous. Now, that's not saying that it doesn't with the Venus charts, with the female charts, but like I said, we're going to look at 3 porn actresses in this, and none of them have moon in Taurus. Now, that's not, we need to be looking at chart after chart after chart after chart after chart, right? But just from our small selection, we're seeing that the delineation for women is different than the delineation for men. And in order for women, now also think about it like this. And I'd love to, especially since we've got a majority women here, I'd love to like maybe stop talking and open the floor if people are comfortable to attitudes about female sexuality. I mean, still there, we still have mothers telling their daughters that their vaginas are dirty and don't touch yourself there and whatever. We still have genital mutilation in other countries. We just have a Supreme Court that decided that women shouldn't have control over their reproductive choices in the United States, which is supposed to, quote, be a free country, unquote, right? So I feel like where we ended last week, I got the very strong feeling from the charts or from the astrologers that the area of sex wasn't really an area that they wanted to be able to delineate perfectly. Like they didn't really want, like they'd take it into account, but they weren't like working on their techniques to see what the person's sexual behavior how it was gonna show up. They weren't doing that. They basically just regurgitated what the oldest resource said for the most part. But the most of the focus was on marriage, not on sexual behavior. We're gonna start with love and marriage next week. But when it came to sexual behavior, they really didn't want to go there too much, and they really didn't want to go there when it came to women, except in the most cursory manner. So my point, though, is that it looks like in order for a woman to, or for women to fully kind of embrace their sexuality in this way, as a porn actress, as a person on display for their sexuality, there needs to be they're not going into it because they're nymphomaniacs. They're going into it because they can detach themselves from what it is they are doing. Detachment, that's the word I was looking for. Moon in Aquarius is detached. Moon Saturn in Aquarius is self-contained. There's a self-containment in this chart that allows them to be able to put themselves on display. And I do think that this chart comes from a negative home. It comes from a negative background. Look at the Mars opposing Saturn. It's a little wide, but still, it's close enough. And the moon is going from the Mars to the Saturn. Well, really, it's going from the Mars to the Mercury. So, which even says to me, this might be another chart of somebody who left an abusive home and went right to prostitution and pornography, or went right to pornography from it. One of the unfortunate things about a lot of women who find themselves in porn is that there is often sexual abuse in the past. There is often coercion, like in the case of a woman like Linda Lovelace, who was famous for her deep throat. It turned out that the male porn actor completely controlled her life and forced her into it. And there's a lot more of that, even on the male side. There's a lot more of that kind of stuff than we know. Relationships where we get into relationships that are really coercive or really, really that are dominating us and get us into really terrible situations. Relationships where we're both drug addicts and we both have to find a way to make money. And so we both find ourselves doing sex work. Like there's all kinds of ways that people end up in porn and in prostitution. They are not always traumatic ways, but in this case, it looks like probably the case. Okay, I'm about to move on. Questions?
Well, I want to add something.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense because it's like with the family issue, because then the moon would be ruling the 12th, and then it's in the
Yes.
and then it's with Saturn. But when you were talking about how Leo is a sign of like being like an exhibitionist or being
Mhm.
comfortable with being nude, I've also have noticed that with Aquarius, like the opposite sign, like Aquarians are much more comfortable being nude, but it's not for any like real reason. Like Leo will do
Sexual.
it for attention. Exactly, exactly. Leo wants admiration, but Aquarius just doesn't have that shame, or it just doesn't care. So it's like
It's the
whatever.
principle. It's the principle of the thing. The principle. There is the fixed air aspect. It's the principle of being naked. Why should you? Because if you get the Aquarius, You get the Aquarius nudist, you scratch beneath the surface, and it's, why should I conform to these, these conventional mores, right? Isn't that what you usually find when it's the Aquarius nudist?
Well, that makes sense.
Right? It's not about, well, my body is so beautiful. The Leo nudist will say, hey, show what you got. Right? Hey, you got it, flaunt it. Our bodies are beautiful. We should all be showing. But the Aquarius nudist will say, I don't agree with how the society says that I have to wear clothes. And so I'm a nudist on principle.
And then with this type of chart here, with the moon Saturn in the seventh, that it probably was an easy road, like, to get into porn, because there was already this predisposition to not caring about what other people may think or what society says.
Rebellion.
So that could also.
This is a rebel's chart. This chart is a rebel. The Mars in the first house, and rebelling through sex, right? Because the fifth house is the sensuality, and the Venus exalted. So that's different.
Rebelling against family.
Yeah, exactly. Teenagers use different things to rebel, right? Some teenagers become drug addicts to rebel. Some teenagers get sexual to rebel. Some teenagers go out and leave the house all times, or whatever else, or do violent things or vandalism to rebel, right? It looks like this chart is definitely about rebellion, but it's about falling into the senses. It's about the rebellion of sensual pleasure. The Neptune on the fifth, the Venus in the Pisces. Probably drugs too with the Neptune there, or at least alcohol. But poisons, right? Scorpio and poisons. So yeah, I bet this person loved their alcohol, might like to do pills, pop the pills too. But all about sensation and enjoyment. And note, Jupiter is the ruler of the natural fifth, and he's right on the cusp of the midheaven.
This chart has a lot of like planets that are in dignity, because like the sun is exalted, Saturn is domicile, Venus is exalted. So that's,
And maybe here's where Saturn is acting as a corruptor of the seventh house, right? So maybe, because we were talking last time about where Saturn can either chill it or corrupt it. Now we would think that he'd be chilling it. I'm sure he is. I bet that this woman might have been like a fire, like a Tasmanian devil in the sack, but a cold fish personally, like extremely distant from it, like it was all acting, like it was really all acting. Interesting. This is such a fascinating chart for the distance, the detachment, and we're gonna see it again. Okay, here's 4707. 40707, she died of AIDS at 27, I think. Yeah, she died of AIDS at 27. So we got Therese of Lisieux, who died in a convent at 27. This one dies of AIDS in 27. And she was not just a porn actress, but she was a super high-end call girl. And so we can see, remembering that Venus and the sun are luxury planets. Note that the sun is the ruler of the second, so that's substance already. And so sun is already luxury. Venus is in Leo. The sun is in the first. So once again, porn actress with sun in the first. And note that the Saturn is on the cusp of the 10th, right? Is the ruler of the part of fortune. It's in the exaltation of Venus. And then Jupiter, the ruler of the 12th, is just leaving it. It's just leaving the square. And so Jupiter, the ruler of the 12th, is connected, and Venus is applying to Jupiter. And so is the Mercury, who's the ruler of the 12th. And Jupiter is the ruler of the 10th. Once again, this connection between the 12th and the 10th and prostitution. I'd never thought about that before. And it didn't necessarily come up in men's charts, although most of the male porn actors are also escorts. So I mean, here, once again, another Saturn-ruled seventh house. Moon in cold, dry Capricorn, licentious, but still cold and dry. In this particular case, Saturn is in a wet sign. It's in the kind of the Venusian, it's in that Venusian exaltation, Jupiterian Venusian exaltation, but it's not a Jupiterian exaltation. Look at Jupiter. He's in his detriment. So he's not really giving it, giving much of this. What I think this person was really good at was there's a certain skill that goes into being a good escort, and it's kind of being the perfect relationship for each client, right? Not all clients want to have sex with you. Many do, like 90% of them will, but oftentimes you will have a client who is lonely and wants you to go to dinner with them and wants good conversation, or wants somebody to pretend. I had one good friend who was an escort for years, and he focused on romantic escorting, so that all of his clients were like his longtime lover, or it was honeymoon. So he basically created like this honeymoon type situation for every client that he was with. That was kind of his specialty. This person's specialty, I wouldn't be surprised if this woman spoke many languages, could speak on many different subjects. Because when you're up in that echelon, you have to have a certain amount of decorum and poise. And we see here with the Venus in Leo and the Mercury in Leo, this woman's a performer. This woman could perform, and she could shine. This woman could really, really shine. Probably a blonde beauty, right? Probably blonde and buxom. The Cancer rising would probably give us somebody buxom, although Saturn, the moon in Capricorn.
I was just about to ask you, was she known for her breasts, because the sun is in Cancer in the first. I was just about to ask that.
All right, so absolutely. So I mean, I don't know, but because she's only listed as 40707, so we don't know her name, but I would say so, right? Because like you said, and I think that this is a buxom blonde beauty. And note that the Venus is in Leo, the Venus and the Mercury are in Leo. The Saturn is in Pisces, which is partially ruled by Venus, who's in Leo, right? The Mars who rules, let's see, the Mars rules what? He's part ruler of Capricorn, and he's in Libra, which is ruled by Venus and Leo.
I think it's interesting that, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I think it's interesting that the ruler of the second is in the first, and that could play out in many different ways, but like the most common thing could be using your body to earn money or to generate money. And that could just mean being like a model of any sort,
True. And now usually when you would see it when the ruler of the first is in the, like you said, ruler of the second and the first, or ruler of the first and the second, right? But ruler of the second and the first, they make money through their body, right? That makes absolute sense. That's a very good point. Now we also saw that with Leona Helmsley. It was Sun Venus in the first, right? That she wasn't making with her body, but it was same thing, Cancer rising chart. This was a greedy, venal, luxury-loving person who was really obsessed with money. This was a very wealthy person. So I think what we can see is that maybe Cancer rising with Sun in the ascendant would usually bring the money, right? Because the sun is luxury. It's not like when the sun is in the second, where the sun burns through the money. This woman would have burned. She would have burned through it anyway. Go ahead. I'm sorry. You feel like this?
I'm sorry. I feel like this chart is a much better like escort than porn star anyway, because it just seems like, because you see the sun opposition moon, and then with the sun being how this person makes their money, and then with the sun being in the moon sign and the moon in the seventh, it's kind of showing like this dance between like maybe male and female, or me versus you. And so
exactly, the perfect reflector, right? One of the things that I used to say about the sex work I did, I said, I could never be an escort, because when you're an escort, you have to do the client's trip. As an erotic masseur, the client has to do my trip. This person could do anybody's trip. The perfect mirror, the full moon in this respect, especially with the moon in the seventh, would make her the perfect reflection of whatever client she had.
And because it's in Capricorn, it can, it's like,
it's all business.
Exactly, exactly.
It's all business. It's strictly business.
I remember there was always like this one article I read online which was talking about the signs that could be, you know, maybe a porn star or escorts. And one sign that would kept coming up was Capricorn. And at the time I was like, no, I think Capricorn is too, you know, much about their reputation. But the more I've learned, it's not necessarily about, it is about the reputation, but it's also about the fact that Capricorn can like be very impersonal.
Yes. Now, here's the thing. I'm not seeing it in the men's charts, Capricorn. I am seeing it in the women's charts. Once again, the distance. Saturn is detached. That's isolated, right? Remember, Saturn is the author of isolation. If you're isolated, you're detached from others. So Saturn is the author of isolation in a period. And thus Saturn can detach you from whatever it is. It's the asceticism and the turning to isolationism that helps you with yoga and towards self-realization. So as a result, once again, as I said, instead of seeing planets in Taurus, planets in Libra, remember when we were looking at Owen Hawk? He's got the moon in Taurus, Cancer rising. He had Venus in Libra. He had all those planets in Libra, including Mercury and Venus and all that other stuff. All of the Venus type stuff lines up for the men. It does not necessarily for the women. So all of the kind of textbook shit that we've been looking at, which is fully based on patriarchal biases, works just fine for the men. We have to come up with a different idea for the women. And I guess part of what I wanted to have comment on is around the acceptance and embrace of female sexuality for each individual female, because I feel like it is still a challenge. There is still a good friend of mine. We were talking about this, and she said, well, what you have to understand is, and I wonder if you all find this interesting or true. She said, inside of every woman, there's a virgin, there's a whore, and then there's this other thing called the Council of Women. And the Council of Women represents all of the mores and conventions, etc. And their main goal is to keep the virgin from crossing over into whore territory. And so what I'd like to know from the women who are with me, if they're interested, because especially it's too bad like that Layla isn't here, who lives in Pakistan, because those of us who live in the West, we have our own little warped understanding of how things either are or should be. We've come from an area where people have experienced quite a bit of sexual and gender freedom, even though it's now being threatened. But there are still countries, India, Pakistan, Indonesia, parts of Indonesia, etc., where there are a lot of these same misconceptions, these same oversimplifications, these same binary thinkings, all of these same things are prevalent right now. And they're prevalent right now in the Northeast, in the Southeast of the United States, and in evangelical culture. So what do the women here think is maybe the key to being able to accept one's sexuality and fully embrace it and fully live within it? I mean, it's going to be different things. Obviously, trust, obviously, body image. All of these things are going to express themselves. But it's interesting to me that when the older astrologers talk about a woman who is sexually daring or a prostitute, or when they say, oh, this man she will be a prostitute, it's almost always involving something with Saturn or Mercury. Now, remember, we already talked about how Mercury represented sodomy and boys, and Saturn represented filthiness and shame. But I think also Saturn and Mercury are the two most detached planets, right? Mercury and Virgo are the sterile signs, are two of the three sterile signs. Saturn is the author of isolation. Mercury is a child. Mercury is not interested in commitment, responsibility, things of that nature. That's all of that stuff is Saturn's. So I think this may be a reason, this may be a factor in how some women are able to adopt the courage necessary to go into this industry, in my opinion. Questions or observations or anything that the ladies would like to say or anybody would like to say at this point?
I do have a question.
Yeah, great.
And it's about the fifth house. So I'm not too sure on houses, but I've had some signification like about sex and pleasures. So how would you incorporate that, for instance, with porn actresses and things like that?
Say that one more time for me. I didn't quite understand all of it.
Okay,
so how would I incorporate the fifth? So you asked about the fifth house. How would I incorporate? Okay, go ahead.
Well, I guess not for you wouldn't look at that for maybe a nun, but for a porn actress, would you ever look at the fifth house in interpreting this area of life?
Good question. Thank you. Okay, so for me, one of the things that that Jyotish and modern astrology have in common is that they both use the fifth house to represent romances. So dalliances that are not serious. I do not do that. I do, however, understand that the fifth house is the joy of Venus and that the fifth house represents sensual pleasures and delights. So it's what we enjoy. So, excuse me. So what I do see the fifth house, I do look at it, and didn't we see it with the two ladies that like in one of them, the ruler of the 10th was, the ruler of the 5th was in the ascendant, wasn't it? Yeah, in this chart, in the porno actress 40706, the ruler of the 5th was in the ascendant. In the 40707, the ruler of the 5th, which is naturally Mars, which is Venus, is in the 2nd with that Mercury, right? So that's already connected to what's going on with whatever's going on in the 2nd, which is being brought to the 1st. That's already there. So yes, I would look at the 5th, but I would look at it as within the context of pleasure, not within the context of romances or promiscuity. It seems that the 7th house traditionally was used for all sexual union. The 5th house was used for sensual pleasure. So it's what you take enjoyment in. You might not take like you sometimes when you see Saturn in the 5th, you know that they have problems enjoying themselves. Right? It doesn't have anything. Obviously, sex is a pleasure, right? Sex is one of the many pleasures. There are many types. So I think of the 5th house as the house of pleasure, not specifically to do with sex, although sex obviously is one of them. How's that?
Cool. Got it. Thanks.
So I guess the long answer is yes. Or the short answer is yes. Okay. This is the chart of Marguerite Steinheil. And Marguerite Steinheil, once again, she was married to a relatively well-known painter, Steinheil. Matter of fact, his last name is Steinheil. But she was also the mistress of the president of France. She was the mistress of various men of high rank. Note that Venus is with the sun. Now, one of the things about Venus with the sun would usually say that if somebody were asking me, how's my love life, right? And I saw Mars on the cusp of the 7th, and I saw Venus with the sun, I'd say your love life, your married life is probably shitty. But I was just reading Scherner right before we started, and he was talking about if Venus is with the sun, that the woman has affairs with men of high rank. There it is. And look, it's not just the sun, it's Jupiter, a superior planet. Remember, the superior planets are Jupiter and Saturn. Well, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, but especially Jupiter and Saturn. So the sun is royalty. Jupiter is a superior planet and is a great benefic. Note that the part of fortune is in the 11th, which is patronage, the good spirit, and that Saturn is in the 10th. And note that the Venus is just leaving the trine of the Lord of the 11th. So we've got somebody who's highly, even though this, and this person was married more than once. This person had problems, not just had problems in their marriage, but was having an affair with the president of France while she was married. She met him, she got married in 1890. She met the president of France in 1897 with her fucking husband. Note that there are no fertile signs, usually, which give you more than one, right? So no water, nothing in water. But we do have the moon in Gemini, and we have Saturn in Sagittarius. Saturn is the ruler of the ascendant. So those are double-bodied signs. So what we can see is that this person might be a depressive and also might not be able to make up her mind. She probably thought she loved her husband, then she met another man, and this person might, I also, from this chart, it felt to me like this person might be a liar. Look at how Mercury is applying to the trine of Mars, and Jupiter and Moon is in the sign of Mercury. I think that this person either lied to themselves or lied to others. Definitely lied to the partner. Which is Jupiter is so Jupiter rules the 10th, or would be the natural 11th, but the 10th and the 2nd. And then the sun rules the 7th. And with the Mars. So there'd be a disruption in marriage or interruptions in marriage. Note that Saturn rules the 12th. He rules the 11th and the 12th and the 1st. But Jupiter is the natural ruler of the 11th. So that puts the Venus with the natural ruler of the 11th and the natural ruler of the 7th. So that brings friends in high places, the 11th, the Jupiter, and the sun, my husband, and relationships that pretty much brings them all together, if we're looking from a whole sign perspective. This woman was also accused of murdering her husband and her mother, or maybe her mother-in-law. No, her mother. Note the Mars on the cusp of the 7th. Let's look at part of marriage for this chart, especially since this person was accused of murder. She got away with it, and she lived to be 85. She got away with it. She left France. She moved to London. She married again and lived a nice long life to be 85. But when she was accused, she did all of these dodgy things, including trying to frame a gardener at the place where she was living. And so she ended up being arrested. There's the 12th house ruler in the 10th. She ended up being arrested and tried. Mars on the 7th, there's court cases. But she got away with it. There's the Venus and the Jupiter on either side of the sun, right? The sun is your court case. And so we've talked a little bit about besiegement, which is when a planet, especially by conjunction, is in between Mars and Saturn, or in between Mars and the sun, or Saturn and the sun. Or going from conjunction to a square opposition to one of those planets. That's besiegement. It can happen the other way around, positive besiegement. Venus, so in this particular respect, the sun is already exalted, and it's receiving a huge boon from both Venus and the Jupiter. So that in and of itself shows us the advantage of her being consistently connected with men, with men who were well known. And they said that even the king of Cambodia was one of her admirers. So this is somebody who attracted the interest of notable men. Let's look at the first part of marriage, which is Saturn to Venus. So, okay, so now, ladies who are new, we can talk about when we look at lots or parts. So once again, when we're looking for a lot or a part, we're taking the distance between two planets that represent kind of the same thing. And then that distance, we then project from the ascendant. So in this case, the distance from Saturn to Venus is 120 degrees plus 4. So we're going to go 120 degrees plus 4. That will take us to 24 degrees of Gemini. Here's the ruler of the part of marriage, with the Venus and the ruler of the seventh. Venus is the lady of marriage. Sun is the ruler of the seventh, and Jupiter is the greater benefic. So this whole system that we were just talking about. It is not a Casimir Jupiter. Okay, I was just wondering, is it a Casimir Jupiter? But because they're in the same degree, it's not. Okay, let's look at the second one, which is from Sun to Venus. So we go back 6. Back 6 would take us to 14 Aquarius, right on the K2. We've always talked about how K2 represents disillusionment, right? So that gives us a clue. And then here's the Saturn. So sexual union and marriage is a major part of this life, right? It's because we know that when planets are in angles or succeed in houses, that whatever is connected to that planet can advance. That agenda is advanced. And the last one we would look at is, and that is interesting to me because this makes me think that she was not, oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, this makes me think that she was not that interested in sex, if that's the case. By the way, she was there when the president of France died. And they walk in, she goes in to meet him, and they walk in, what they find, she calls them, and they walk in, she's shuffling her clothes, she's getting her clothes back together, he's dead. They think that she was giving him a blowjob and that he had a heart attack or a seizure while he was coming. So he died in flagrante delicto. So that's interesting. So she's at that death. And then there's also this Mars, then there's, there is what they call the Steinheil affair, which is where her husband and mother were found murdered. And she is accused of murdering them. I think that might be all I wanted to say about that. Oh, we were going to look at the last one, which is Venus to the cusp of the 7th. So it's another 120 degrees. It's exactly 120, 20 to 20. So it would take us back to the Mercury. So the Mercury is really, as far as the lots are concerned, the Mercury is really telling us the most about what the marriage will be. And sure enough, it's applying to the Mars. The moon, the moon just left it. So the moon just left the application. So it's separating from the Mercury and going next to the Mars. So I think that this is an argumentative person. This is an argumentative person who might be a liar, might be kind of treacherous in their behavior, treacherous in their speech, but really, really blessed, given a boon as far as the Venus love thing is concerned. Her father-in-law was one of the most famous painters in France. And her husband was this man's son. Questions, comments? Tracy Lords, another porn actress. Tracy Lords left a very negative home situation. Note, Cancer on the 4th, this Rahu Saturn. She went from the home directly into nude photos and then into porn by the time she was 16. She was able to, I think by the time she was like 20 or 21, it became known that it wasn't known that she was underage when she was doing it. And so after the fact, she became this media sensation when she was in her early 20s. And then it became known that she had been in porn for years, and she had started when she was 15 or 16. And then she was able to kind of turn it into a legitimate career as an actress. Even she starred in some regular films, nothing really high level, but she was able to kind of leverage that notoriety into some kind of respectability. So let's look at that. So another Libra rising chart. The cusp of the 5th is the part of fortune. So the part of fortune we'll say is in the 5th. Makes good sense. And so we know that note that Saturn rules the 4th and the 5th. So she went directly from the abusive home into being exploited sexually. Have we noticed that I think in almost all of the porn actresses charts, there's been something in the 7th? That's not always the case in the male porn actress charts. In almost every chart of these porn actresses so far that we've seen, in every chart of the porn actresses we've seen, there's been something in the 7th. In 2 of them, Saturn has owned the cusp. In this one, Saturn is in it. Now, that could just be because my own intuition attracted me to this kind of thing, or it might be something that we might look at in the charts of porn actresses. I'm sure we're not, but it might be interesting to see Saturn in connection to the 7th house. Saturn is the corruptor, right? So in this particular case, maybe Saturn isn't necessarily specifically corrupting the Venus, because there's no connection between Saturn and Venus here. But Saturn is corrupting the associations, the intimate association. And Saturn is in the 7th, ruling the 5th of pleasure. I wonder if she had got any pleasure from it. This might be another type of rebellion where we rebelled ourselves into restriction, into imprisonment. I wouldn't be surprised if there was an element of I wouldn't say she was trafficked, but if there was an element of imprisonment, of her feeling imprisoned because of the Saturn and Aries in it. Where's the moon? The moon's in Virgo. This is another one of those charts where the moon's in oh, right. So Steinhal had the moon in Gemini. Tracy has the moon in Virgo. All of us have we should all have female friends who discovered that sex is power. I mean, almost all women do realize that. If sex isn't trauma, if sex isn't something to be avoided, then the embrace of sex is a power over men. And we all have that female friend or have had that female friend who was all about how her sexuality had her motherfucking man shit wrapped around her finger. It was all about sex as power for her. And in many cases, she didn't really care about the man so much, or in most cases, she wasn't having sex even for her own pleasure. She was having sex to manipulate power over him. Now, in a situation where there are very few avenues of power, girlfriend, take whatever you can get. I think in this particular case that this Tracy Lords chart is a chart about reclaiming one's power, and that through sex she was able to do it. Like I said, I think that there was an aspect of this being a prison that she then was able to escape. Note that the moon's in the 12th too, giving once again this feeling of imprisonment, this feeling that I don't want to say coerced, but I'm trapped. Right? Saturn in Aries is trapped in paralysis, that there'd be a paralysis to this period that she wouldn't be able to kind of get through. And that more than likely, probably it would finish by 1998. By 1998, when she's 30, she should probably be completely finished. Let's see where the spirit is so we can do the thing for that to see how long that would take her. Because if that one takes her to 25, then we'll know we're right, or 27. Then we'll know we're right. Okay, so daytime, sun to moon. It's 120 minus 4, so back 120, forward 4. Back 120, forward 4. So that's 15 Gemini. So, okay, so that's the first 20 years of life. So after 20, and see, Mercury rules the 9th and the 12th. So after 20, so by 1988, she should probably have been able to escape whatever it was that happened to her. So I've actually got her Wikipedia up. Let's see. Oh, I thought I had it. All right. All right. Lourdes did more than 100 porn films and videos between 1984 and 1986. In 1989, she successfully made an unprecedented transition to serious film with Crybaby. So I'm absolutely right. Lori's and married prop master Brooke Yaton in 1990, settling comfortably into domesticity. So as I mentioned, by 1988, it should have been over. Wow, that was good. Oh, I don't know. All right, so Tracy Lords, that was what's going on. So why did I say that? Mostly because the ruler of the fifth is in the seventh, and it's Saturn in fall. Saturn is already isolation and restriction. Saturn in Aries I call paralysis. So this would be something, she'd be paralyzed in the home, right? He rules the fourth, and she'd be paralyzed in whatever kind of pleasure thing she fell into. And then noting also that the moon was in the 12th, that there'd be some kind of need for this person to go through a karma of imprisonment, not necessarily being behind bars, but being trapped in a situation that they could not escape until after the age of 20. All right, I think that's the last of the, Heidi Fleiss. So Heidi Fleiss was called the DC Madam. So I don't know if this shows it. No, another Venus in Aquarius. Because I was just going to say, I don't know if this says anything about her sexuality herself, but she didn't mind going into the sexual business. Now, Heidi Fleiss was born 2 days before me. So almost all of our placements are exactly the same. Matter of fact, all of our placements are the same. My moon is at 26 degrees of Aries. Everything else is exactly the same. Oh, and my sun is at 10 degrees. Everything's moved just a little bit, but all of the placements are the same. Isn't it interesting that I've been a whore and she's been a pimp? And maybe that Mars Venus on the cusp of the ascendant, straddling the cusp of the ascendant, might have a little bit to do with it. Now, on some level, what is a madam? Or a pimp or a madam is essentially a manager, right? Or a manager, yeah, essentially a manager, essentially a talent agent, right? Except in the madam's case, all of the talent is in one place. Same thing with the pimp. All of the talent is out there on the street. In the madam's case, all of the talent is in the house or in her Rolodex. Note the Mercury in the 10th, very close to the cusp of the 11th. Remember, this woman had politicians, kings. She had another one super, super high level. And in this case, the Mercury Jupiter is helping the 5th and the 11th. We know that Mercury is business. Note that the ruler of the ascendant is on the cusp is close to the cusp of the 2nd. So this person is all about money, and that the Mercury has just left the Mercury is closer than mine. It's just left the square of the Saturn. Not just left it, but pretty close. And then the moon is moving to the sextile of Mars. That's the next application she's going to make. And Mars is the ruler of the 10th house in this chart. And Mars is with Venus. And Venus and Mars are in Aquarius, which doesn't necessarily want to do the fucking themselves. And Mercury's sextiling the ascendant. So I think that this is very much more an administrative chart, but it shows more than likely this woman had a lot of friends. And like myself with the Jupiter and Gemini in retrograde, Jupiter's not so interested in virtue. I'm a virtuous person, but I've done a lot of, things that people would say are not virtuous, like being a sex worker. But I'm not generally a liar. I treat people well. I'm compassionate. I've got those Jupiterian things. But as far as sexual morality is concerned, Fuck that shit. I don't have any time for that. And as far as general conventions are concerned, I don't have any time for that shit either. Thus, maybe this Jupiter in Gemini might be having something to do with it. He rules the Saturn, who rules the ascendant. See, my chart is Sag rising, so the Jupiter rules the ascendant. In this case, the Jupiter rules the ruler of the ascendant. And the Jupiter is in Gemini, which is very, very interpersonal, or at least communicative. And with the Mercury, this person like me has the gift of gab and has done it on the 11th/5th axis. Friends, patrons, good friends in high places, patrons, and whores, right? Because the 5th house is the whorehouse.
If I recall, she never gave up the names of like her clients either, right? Like I
No,
think
she
she
never did. Never did.
So where would we find that? Because I would think like a mute sign, but I don't. I mean, I see Saturn.
Fourth house is the part of secrets. The natural fourth is Taurus. Both rulers of the 4th house are on the cusp of the 10th, on the cusp of the ascendant. Okay, and the part of fortune is in the natural 4th. Matter of fact, the 4th is Taurus. It's the very last degree of Taurus. So we've got the part of fortune is also the ruler of the house of secrets. So we've got the ruler of the 10th with the ruler of the 4th. And the ruler of the 10th with the part of fortune, who's the ruler of the 4th of secrets. So we've got the career connected with secrets. And the secrets are of a Venusian kind. And even if we looked at the Mercury, you know, all of the houses of the unseen are the 4, 8, and 12, right? 8th house is Mercury there, and he's on the cusp of the 11th. The 12th house is Saturn, rules by Saturn. He's the chart ruler and on the cusp of the 2nd, how she's making her money. So it's all about what's not being seen, even though the sun's in the 11th. And see, there's the notable man. And 8th house, and there's the notable man in government. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, which is government. And even in Jyotish, the sun is government. So, and note that the sun is the ruler of the 7th. And note that the ruler of the 7th is in a sign ruled by Saturn. What is this thing with prostitution, female prostitution, pornography, and Saturn connection to the 7th house? In this, it's also with the Venus. It hasn't always been with the Venus, but it has in every single example had a connection to the 7th house cusp. This makes me want to look at a lot more charts of female porn stars and prostitutes. And the very last chart that we'll look, anything about this one anyone wants to say? Sorry. If you want me to go back to it, I will. The very last chart we'll look at is Ellen DeGeneres. So, Pisces rising. Isn't it interesting? Ellen DeGeneres, her whole image was around the niceness, the good, the being kind, all that Jupiterian, Piscean kind of energy. But of course, here Jupiter is with Rahu in Scorpio, and Mars
terrible behind the scenes,
right? And the Mars Jupiter exchange, Mars and Jupiter are exchanging signs. So that's how. If I'd seen this chart before, I would have said this person's known for being nice. I don't know what the fuck that's about. I mean, think about all the horrible things she's said to her staff, and with that Mars Saturn in the 10th. So this once again, especially for the new people, I do not use the sign on the 10th or the planets in the 10th necessarily to show what profession. What I tend to find is that the ruler of the 10th and the planets in the 10th show us either what we encounter or what we bring to it. And she most certainly brought Mars Saturn to it, pretending to be Jupiter, right? So pretending to be, and look, Jupiter, Neptune. So the illusion of Jupiter when it's really all Mars Saturn. I love it.
And then that's the whole double body theme with Pisces.
Exactly. And the fact that the Neptune's trining the ascendant too. But we're really trying to see is, can we tell that she's a lesbian from this chart? Of course not. We've got another Venus and Aquarius chart. We've got a Venus and Sun, and so that could have said this person's been connected to men in high places, like the other chart, right? Last half of Sag is feral as well. Yes, it is indeed. I know very well. My ascendant is at 27th degree. And I've lived in 2 different countries and all over the United States in the past since I was 37. Yeah, so no, I don't think we can. I mean, certainly Bonatti, or some of these guys would say, oh, look, Venus is in Saturn sign. There is no connection. Look at also Mercury is in Saturn sign. Oh, there's the corruption. But I don't think there's anything we can really see that would tell us, oh, yeah, this is a lesbian's chart. What I can see is a proliferation of masculine signs. Moon is in Aries. Mars and Saturn are in Sag. Venus and Sun are in Aquarius. But Jupiter and Mercury are both in female signs, and Jupiter is the ruler of the part of fortune, ruler of the ascendant. So we've got a mixture of things that we are seeing in this chart. But as I said last week, I think that the astrology can tell us more, or the astrology can tell us how much sex you want, but I don't think it can really fully tell us what gender or what gender you prefer, or whether you're homosexual or bisexual. I mean, we can make speculations based on things we're seeing, but there's a lot of double-bodied in this chart. This is not a bisexual. This is a lesbian's chart, So I think that we can put to rest the idea of being able to find sexual orientation in a chart. We have someone new that just joined us. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here.